My name is Ned Sodrick, and I kind of came along about 15 years after the Benkoskis in a kind of a different era. And so my memories are a little different than theirs, but pretty much the same. They gave a vivid description of the way Shamokin was, and I think to put things into context, we have to realize that the reason that all these people came to Shamokin was coal. Things were tough in Europe, and so people migrated here, and they were attracted to this area because there were jobs. And most of those jobs were in the coal mines. The area around here also looked very similar to their surroundings that they were used to in Europe. I guess the next big industry was textiles. And a lot of the women worked in the textile mills, even the men did. My dad worked in the mine and in the textile mills. And so that's what brought people here. And so with them came their traditions. Some were Polish, some were Irish, some were everything you could think of that was over in Europe came here as well. And as everybody described, everybody seemed to be poor, and so nobody realized that they were poor. They just did what everybody was doing. But I made a list of some things that maybe your listeners and people watching this could chime in and give them some discussion points. My grandmother worked at Edgewood Park. I lived about 3 blocks from the park. As I was growing up in the 50s, the park was kind of on a downslide. I didn't see boats and things on the lake. We skated on the lake. We fished in the lake. There was an island out in the middle of the lake. That lake, by the way, is the lower parking lot at Shamokin Area High School now. And we would skate there. We'd build a fire on the island and just have a great time around. And again, that lake kind of surrounded the swimming pool, which was also a vibrant part of the community. On the sign, it was billed as the Pennsylvania's largest pool. And whether that was true or not at the time, I don't know. But Nancy's comments about how rough the bottom of the pool was is accurate. There was no smooth cement on it except for 2 spots, which we called the greenies. And other than those 2 green spots, the pool had a very rough bottom. But it was a very large pool, and it attracted a lot of kids. And every summer, you could hear the noise coming from the pool blocks away because of the crowds that were at the pool. They gave swimming lessons every morning at the pool, but again, on a Monday and a Tuesday, that water was freezing cold. And by the end of the week, it started to get a little warmer, but then again, they dumped it out again. And the only means of filtering the water that was in the pool, they threw large blocks of chlorine in the water every day. And that helped to keep the pool water clean and probably passable too. I don't even know how much state standard testing went on in those days. But it was a vibrant place, a very popular place here in Shamokin. The Township football stadium out in this part of the area, out of Edgewood, was kind of a thing that sticks in my mind as a kid growing up. When those lights would come on a Friday night, and all those people, there were no parking lots for the Township football stadium. There were people, all the people who came here, and there were lots and lots of big games and lots of people coming. They would all park in the streets in the neighborhoods in front of your homes. And then the smell of French fries, the lights on, and the crowd's noise. That Township stadium on a football stadium was really exciting. The other thing that strikes me back in memory is that there were always buses running. Buses from every part of Shamokin ran to town, down to Independence Street. There was an Edgewood bus, there was a Ferndale bus, there was a Springfield bus. And those, every half hour they would bring people from those neighborhoods down to town and take other ones back. Many of them carrying bags and things that they purchased from the stores in town. There was also a store called Moser's, and my mom was a big fan of Moser's. So she'd go in there for patterns to make clothing. A lot of the women who were in the homes, the moms and so forth, were people who worked in the mills, and they all knew they knew their way around sewing machines. And they could make dresses and so forth, and they'd buy patterns at Moser's store. But the big thing for me as a little boy, remembering the pulley system in Moser's, that they would send the money up to the office. If somebody was paying for an item, it would go up in a canister, they'd pull a string and the can would go up. Somebody in the office would make the change, put it back in, and send down the receipt for the person to buy. And that was always just fun to watch. I didn't care how long my mom stayed in there. I was busy watching these canisters going by. Friday night, bumper to bumper traffic. Saturday night, bumper to bumper traffic. And that went on into the 70s, really.
Listening to the jukebox Saturday night.
The jukebox, there were no there were no dollar stores or anything. There were a couple places where people would hang out. Cole Township kids hung out at a place called Arvy's, which was down on Independence Street. Shamokin kids hung out at a place called Al's, which is Al Pavish up on Market Street. Even though they were rival schools, there were a lot of intermingling. Boys from Cole Township married girls from Shamokin, and the rivalry lived on through their marriage as well. But
that is something I wanted to expand on.
Okay.
And it still happens today. My mom and my brother and my uncle are still head to head about maroon and gray and purple.
Yep.
Why? Why was that such a thing?
I think it's just it's the fatherland. It's where you were. It's where you were born. You were a purple demon. You're going to be a purple demon forever. And as Mr. Binkowski mentioned, how tough it was to join the churches, it was just as tough to join the schools. And there were many horrendous meetings that took place between school board members, not only in Shamokin and Cole Township, but back in 1966, the schools were kind of mandated. They went from 600 and 700 schools down to 301 schools. And there was a carrot there. The state offered money for that. But some school districts had more debt than others, so they didn't want to join. Others, they didn't want to lose their mascot. They didn't want to lose their traditions and so forth. Greyhounds. And so, merging schools became a very tough issue. There were people who lost elections from it. There were people who went to court over it. But that, again, it's human nature, I think, is the bottom line on all that. Back in the 50s, when the snow would come down, and it seemed like the storms were greater back then, they would plow the streets every now and then, but they wouldn't put salt down. And so the kids were able to sleigh ride for weeks after a big snowstorm. And believe me, we did. We couldn't wait to get home from school. And because of the hills in Shamokin, it made it fun to be able to start up in Ferndale and go all the way down to Market. Nobody had snow tires in those days. Some people who did the traveling had chains on their cars. But the rest of them carried a bucket of ashes in the trunk, and if they got stuck somewhere, they'd pull the ashes out. That's from the coal shanty. Yeah. Right. The coal miners who had trucks would instead of hauling coal in the summer, they would haul fruit and vegetables, and they would go up and down the streets. I can remember one guy whose name Bob Marquette. He had an all-inclusive van that he drove around, and there was everything in that truck from shoelaces to onions. And the parents would wait for him to come, and they would be able to buy from him. That was the early rising of the dollar stores and the neighborhood stores, because every block had a neighborhood mom and pop store. Mm-hmm. There were no Turkey Hills or no Wawas or anything like that. Every block seemed to have a store. In those days, the economic condition of most everybody was similar. And if you were poor, you didn't know you were poor because everybody was poor. And you did a lot of, cost cutting things. I knew a guy that would turn his motor off when he got down a hill, so he wouldn't waste gas till he get down to where he was going. It was a matter of how can I save money. My dad used to stuff rags in his tires when he'd get a flat because they didn't have inner tubes. I mean, when you hear all the things that people did, and then a lot of people have picked up on that and still do it to this day. But it was just a great time to grow up. I would never want to trade it for anything. I wanted to be a coal miner. When I was in grade school, I just thought my dad was a bootleg coal miner. They had a bootleg mine owned by Scoverns and Salters out on the Gown City Mountain, and every now and then he would take me up to it, and I kept stressing, how I want to be a coal miner. And there was a bad accident in the Hazleton area. There were a couple of miners trapped in a town called Shepton, yes, thank you. And I think at that point in time, my dad wanted to send me a message. So one Sunday he said, how'd you like to go down to the mines? I said I would. And nobody's working, so he took me up there, and he put me in a buggy. And it was just a kind of an arrow, tip of an arrow is what it looked like. And when it would come out, it would dump the coal into the waiting trucks. But he put me in there, and he could run the winch that would send me down, and the cable had marks on it. So he knew exactly where that cable car was. And I jumped in there, and I thought, this is fantastic. And I started going down, and it started getting colder, and the light started getting smaller where I came from, and then all of a sudden the water's dripping on me, and by the time I got to the bottom, he left me down there for maybe 5 minutes. It felt like 5 days. And when he finally brought me up, I said, I'm going to college. When you look back on it, it was a great time to grow up, and there was a lot more camaraderie between the neighborhoods and all of the people. which made it a wonderful place to grow up.